I'm concerned about the widening gap between critics and fans. We see it a lot in movies, we see it some in comics. It's not healthy, and I want to talk about why. Hey there, this is Perch. This is going to be one of those kind of reasoned takes, I think, that may not feel really good to anyone emotionally. That's why my subscriber count grows a lot slower than others because I could give you a super hot emotional take, get you worked up, and some people feed off of that dopamine hit. But I want to give you kind of a more reasoned take on this because I think this is an important topic. It's one I'm going to hit a lot over the next 3 years or so as things come to a head. And I want to give you a little bit of prediction. I mentioned it on Twitter, got kind of a lukewarm response, but I still believe it. In fact, today more than ever. We saw this Gamergate, and forget about the details of who was right, who was wrong, what this side represented, what this other side represented. If you could go to 100,000 foot view, you could describe Gamergate as some people grew disenchanted and frustrated with quote unquote either the media or the insiders, and the media and the insiders grew disenfranchised with the fans, and then this conflict erupted. And that's probably the most passive, neutral way I could describe what that situation was about. A lot of people like to stick immediate labels on it, like, well, one side was the alt-right, women hating people, and then the other side will describe it as dirty journalists who were, SJWs and all the rest. There are a lot of labels you can throw on things. I think my point was you had two groups that came at odds with each other, and then they really struggled to gain any kind of understanding between them. And so this conflict drug on and on and on. And actually, the longer it drug on, the more entrenched people got in their positions, where they didn't want to ever come together. They didn't want to heal that rift. And that you get to that point when one side calls the other side so many names that reconciliation becomes impossible. I mean, think about it in terms of marriage. If you had a marriage and people fight all the time in a marriage. But let's say one side one side cheats on the other and then comes back and just hits the other person and calls them abusive names and just goes on and on with this for months and months and months. At that point, there is no reconciliation possible. There's not a world where it comes together and it's healthy. Now, certainly there are plenty of marriages where it comes together and it's unhealthy. I think that's kind of what we have with gaming today. I mean, the reality is, fans need games. They want games. They want to play games. The gaming industry needs fans. So despite however many names they call each other and however bloody and angry it gets, both sides require each other. And so therefore it puts an interesting spin on the relationship. It becomes like a bad marriage at that point where people are sticking with it for the kids. In this case, the money or the games. So then we had Comicsgate, which was kind of a different thing in a lot of cases. And once again, I don't want to go into the details of that, but the similarity there is that you had fans who felt disenfranchised by the publishers. You had creators and publishers who felt like the fans were being unnecessarily toxic back. And this situation develops again. And comics got to kind of the punchline faster than games. The Comicsgate movement got to it faster than the Gamergate movement. In that the comics, it took games a couple of years before some of the game companies, some of the journalists, some of the critics started saying things like, "We don't want you, just go away." Okay, we don't agree. This gamer is just toxic and wrong, and we're never going to see eye to eye. I wish they would just leave, and we'll just take less money. You start to just say, we'll just make less because we don't want these fans anyway, which is a stunning and striking kind of thing to say if you're a business. And no big company can survive with that mentality. Interesting statement, because I think companies will say things like, we won't serve the KKK in our restaurant. Sure, that's a fine thing to say, and it's even a good value to hold. I mean, I'd have no trouble if somebody came in like a hood and a rope, and they're marching in that costume. I would say, I'm not going to help you here. You got to leave, because that's an inciting, hateful, terrible, outfit. There's nobody wanders around in that outfit and it's like, oh, this guy's just having a laugh. They just, nope. That's it's like It's like blackface or brownface or those kinds of things. Everybody knows at this point that's not okay. So if you're going to go out and do that, you're going to be rejected by a lot of places. Probably get your ass handed to you at some point. So I think that where this gets into comics is that comics got there faster. So several of the pros, unfortunately, a lot of the creators are freelance. So it's not really their decision to make, but they would say things like, I don't want you to buy my comic anyway. Just get lost. And the comic journalism group, which is really nothing. It's not a business. It's people who are propped up on ad clicks and free comics. There's not really any money in it. Or saying things like, well, maybe these. Every time you see like a Jude Terror go, well, maybe these fans shouldn't even buy comics in the first place. It's like, who are you? Who are you speaking for? You have no stock. You're not in any of these businesses. So really, it's just some guy's opinion, and he'd be quick to say, oh yeah, it is just my opinion, but he's not speaking for any publisher. You get high enough up in Disney or AT&T, and you will not find an executive will say, yeah, we're okay with just a big portion of the fan base disappearing. They're not going to say that out loud. Now maybe they think it, but they're not going to say it. And to my example of the KKK earlier, it's fine to say these people aren't allowed when it's so clear that that's what they are. But when you start broadening that umbrella, if you will, and you're like, well, this person who's just a white dude who made a joke I kind of didn't like is, a Nazi. Now you've broadened the umbrella so wide that you're catching just random people who have nothing to do with anything. And so you can't start turning away those fans. Again, a business collapses if that's what you're up to. So these two movements have gone, and like I said, Comicsgate moved faster and quicker, obviously smaller than the gaming industry. But the worrisome part was, again, how quickly it got to just leave. And so we're in the first act or the first quarter, or about to enter the second quarter of what I dearly hope in my heart will not be called Moviegate, but the same scenarios have started to occur with Hollywood and movies and the critics and the actors and kind of those statements and the fans. You saw it with kind of the little spat that went on with Brie Larson and the people who didn't like Brie Larson and kind of that back and forth. Brie Larson going out and making some pretty incendiary statements that you could were twisted. To be fair to her, and a lot of people may disagree with that because they're remembering a quote they think Brie Larson said, but really they heard it on a video somewhere and somebody took a piece of a longer quote that still was not good. But if you see it in the whole context, it's not as insane as it sounded in just that one little snip. And I had a brutal argument about somebody who's like, no, that's not true. And it's like, okay, but we have to at least argue about the same facts. So did you read, this whole quote? And the answer was, well, no, but I heard this on, blah, blah, blah show. And it's like, okay, then we're not even having the same argument because you're arguing a piece, not the whole thing. Again, none of this excuses some of the statements that are made, but also if you notice from the marketing and the promotion of Brie Larson and Captain Marvel and Avengers, she did tone down. She absolutely toned down. And it's easy. People were pulling quotes from months previous and pushing them back into the current mainstream. But I strongly believe there was some pressure from Disney or a producer or somebody who's like, hey, you got to chill it out. You're becoming bigger than the movie. You got to stop that. Disney is really aggressive about not letting the actors, the talent, become bigger than the product. That's always been their style, whatever it happens to be. But this feud still was there. And some people labeled it still Comicsgate because Captain Marvel was a comics character, but really this was the first hint of movies. And then we saw the same thing kind of develop with Dave Chappelle and his show, and Rotten Tomatoes showing a critic score of like -50 and the audience score of like 99.9. These gaps are warning signs. It's like the shark fin in the water that state that trouble is coming. And that's the part to watch out for. So it's not healthy to have the professionals, the talent, the actors, the comic creators, the game designer, whoever it is, and the critics, the media, aligned so tightly together where they feel like one operating unit. And then the buying public on the other side. And it's time we start also saying it buying public, not fans. Fans can be anybody. These are people who spend money on the product. It's a little bit more than just a fan. That's somebody who's putting a financial stake into the product that we're talking about. When that gap widens and widens and widens, it's like the bad marriage I discussed earlier. It becomes very hard to sew it back together. And it does need to be sewed together because ultimately one business is going to produce a product that the other side is going to consume. And if you disrupt that chain, then things get really goofy. It becomes very hard to project which movies are going to do well and which are not. It becomes harder for the theater operators and the licensors and all the people that surround this ecosystem to know how to manage their business. And it disrupts a lot. And in that disruption, the people who win typically are the gigantic megacorps. If we do get a movie gate, like we got a gamer gate and a comics gate, if we get that kind of that gate, God, please don't call it that. If we get that movement, that moment, first of all, it's going to be dramatically bigger than games and comics. Games and comics also lived in this kind of geek culture, nerd culture, subculture. Movies are much more widespread. And so if you look at what's currently going on with politics, where you have a deep divide, similar to these two sides and two side only divides are toxic. It's not toxic fans. It's this whole situation is toxic. It creates. It's like everything is about Trump. Either you love him or you despise him, and then however you fit on that spectrum, you view the entire world through that lens. That's dangerous, and that's imagine that level of kind of hostile behavior only in movies. But the difference is, at least in politics, you have somewhat, not perfectly, but you have politicians on each side, you have media on each side, certainly more one than the other, and then you have a population that kind of divides up under that. What happened with games and with comics is you had one side comprised heavily of the business, the critics who are reliant upon the business in a very weird way. A lot of them want to be in the business, so that's why they're a critic. And then some sycophants, certainly, that sit on one side, and then you have just angry, grumbling fans on the other, and people. And so that is a different kind of divide, and it's a dangerous one. So if you get that for movies, it's much bigger scale. It's bad, and I think it's not healthy. The critics have always had a different view of the product. It's like when the Academy Awards go down, and you're like, how did that picture win Best Picture of the Year when these other five pictures made all the money? And the answer is, well, they're looking at different things, and making money is not the only quality of how a film gets judged. That's all fine, but when that gap widens further and further and further, it creates thorough mistrust in the industry, the products being made. It sucks money and time and energy out of it. It hurts all the people in orbit around it. And so every now and then, we saw this with games, we saw this with comics, we'd see people going, screw it, let the entire thing burn down, burn it all down. And those people are absolute thorough nutcases. If this is you and you've ever said one of those things, you are a jackass. Uh, I'm sorry. It's not helpful to anyone if the industry implodes, be it comics, be it games, be it movies. This is not helpful to getting creative work out, to getting many different types of things going, to discovering good talent, to reading good content. The industry blowing up means prices go higher, books become more scarce, there are fewer creators, and ultimately one to two very, very huge entities control everything. You lose tons of your freedom in this cycle. And that's what we're going through. So if you're one of those people going, you know what, the entire comic industry is going to explode, and I say, let it burn, these guys have earned it, screw it, all you're doing is you are begging for Disney to own more, because that is the inevitable result. All of this stuff is not going to hurt the giant multi-billion-dollar company of which Marvel or DC represent, less than a third of 1% of their overall revenue. It's not going to hurt them. It will cut a bloody swath through Image and down of those companies. And that, again, that's not healthy. It destroys a feeder system up, and it just puts more control into the companies that a lot of people say they hate. So there's just better ways. You have to fix the industry, not blow up the industry. And so when it comes to movies and this gap between critics and fans, we do have to find ways to fix it. We have to find ways to get away from this mistrust. We've got to find ways to bridge this gap. And we should also look around ourselves and say, who are the people around us that are willing to fix it, are willing to admit they're wrong where need be, willing to help? And who are the people who are just every day on a campaign for war? Shit. That was not a shot at war campaign. I'm saying a campaign of just blowing things up. People blowing things up every day. That's what I'm referring to. I feel like I've looked in the mirror and said the Beetlejuice's name 3 times. Anyway, my point here is simply this. Figure out who's trying to help and who's trying to just blow things up for their amusement. And then we got to gather the people together who want to help and start to actually try and help. And this will include critics, it'll include creators, it'll include fans, it'll include customers, include people who are buying things. And that's the way forward. The other stuff is just noise. Anyway, that's my opinion on it. I think this is a dangerous time. I'm worried about where this is all going. I honestly am. And I don't have it in me to have yet another fan revolt for yet another medium, which are getting progressively uglier and nastier because people want to get to the real battle faster. So they shortcut a lot of the moments that in theory could be used for healing and get straight to just throwing people on the fire. I don't think that's good or healthy. But what do you think? Leave me a comment below. Hopefully this is food for thought. If you're one of those people who is just ready to just say you're wrong, this is why the creators are bad, or this is why the fans are bad, keep in mind it's funny in the comments or on social media in public, I'll get you're wrong, this is why the creators are bad and evil and they did this first. I'll get those kinds of comments in public. And in private, in DMs and email, I'll get the exact same thing from some of the creators saying, you know what, it was the fans who started all this. It's them who harassed. It's almost the exact same message, just from opposite ends. There's something funny in that. I don't know what. Like maybe I should make a comic book about it. Leave me a comment below. Let me know your thoughts. Like, subscribe, click the bell for notifications, or click that downvote button if you just know I want battle. That'd be great to know. Follow me on Twitter at Comic Perch, and thank you for listening.